and I got referred. And then I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And then I had a situation where I was really struggling again. And so I was like, I don't think I can wait on this anymore. But they need to know. Well, hello, hello, hello. I'm Becky, and this is Spoony Squared, my channel where we're going to talk about the workplace and things that might hold us back, in particular, neurodiversity, chronic health conditions, and gender. And the reason this channel focuses on those things is because those things have all held me back in the workplace. So today, what I thought we would do, jump right in and look at autism. And this is my autism diagnosis story. And I'm joining one of many, many people across YouTube who have talked about their autism diagnosis story. Well, it's useful to hear different perspectives, and hearing stories from other people really, really helped me. That's why I'm telling this story. When did it start? About a year ago, I was really struggling with, I guess, shutdowns, meltdowns, a lot of anxiety, and it was confusing to me because it was things that had happened in the past, but it was things I thought that I dealt with. So in the past, when these things had happened, I thought it was because of situations that I was in and situations that I had worked through and got over. I found myself in the same sort of situations again and experiencing the same feelings again, and just couldn't understand why. And initially I was putting a lot of it down to the fact that I have a chronic health condition and I suffer with fatigue around that, and just thinking that I was feeling fatigued and that was making me more anxious because I couldn't work so much. But I began to realise that there was something else going on, because there were certain things that would trigger the fatigue that I actually wouldn't get physical symptoms until after I was feeling kind of a mental shutdown, and then getting back into life was really, really difficult, and the things that are suggested from an autoimmune perspective weren't really working. So I was just finding it really, really hard to re-establish routine, and then once I'm in routine, everything was great, and then things would come along to break apart that routine. So I was looking on the internet for to see if there was anything that might help me, and a bunch of autism videos started to pop up, things to do with autism in women in particular. And until that time, it was really something that I hadn't looked at all that much. I had a little bit of knowledge about, but really hadn't looked at very much. So I started to look in more depth, hear more people's stories, and recognise so much of myself in those people's stories. In particular, the idea that you really might not come across as somebody who's typically autistic, whatever that may mean, in the sense of I've been somebody who's good at performing, who comes across as bubbly and energetic, and like I kind of get on well with people, and all the time this was leading to me having massive burnouts. So the ideas of mirroring and masking, which I just so want to explore more, that was really when those ideas came to the fore. And I was thinking, well, hang on a second, I've definitely been mirroring and masking based on the stories that I'm hearing. What does this mean for some of the other criteria? And all of a sudden, like, all these things that I used to do in my childhood, or like different situations that I'd found myself in, were like popping into my mind so clearly as they related to autism. So I started to get that idea of maybe this is what's going on for me. Well, obviously I looked up like what are the steps that you take, and you're meant to go to your GP and then they refer you. So I was like, okay, I think this is probably the next step for me. But I spoke to my sister about it because she works with children with special educational needs and has a lot of experience working with neurodiversity, with autistic children, and actually the whole process of getting a diagnosis was like a part of her job. So she had a really good understanding, and she did a master's that was focused around finding strengths in special needs children with, I think, a specific focus on autism. I should know that. I'll ask her. So we spoke about it, and it was really helpful talking to her about it. She reflected back many of the things that I started to think. So with her help, I wrote a document which looked at the DSM-5, which kind of document all the different criteria you have to meet in order to be diagnosed as autistic. And yeah, and so I wrote down all the different things where I felt like I fitted each of those criteria. I then spoke to my GP, and it was a phone call. I couldn't get a GP appointment, and in fact with GP appointments you had to, at that time with my GP, I had to fill out a form online. I couldn't even speak to anyone, and essentially the form online, I said something along the lines of, I'm really struggling, getting a lot of anxiety. I didn't want to label it as something at that point because I had no idea what it was. But I did say I want to talk to somebody so that I can understand what I might be able to, what might be going on underneath the surface. Or if there might be some cause of this. And so eventually, like 3 weeks later, I managed to get this phone call with the GP, and I spoke to the GP, and they said, no, there's no such thing as an adult autism diagnosis.
No, there's no such thing as an adult autism diagnosis. There's ADHD. Do you mean ADHD? Do you think you've got ADHD?
No, I don't think I've got ADHD. I think I've got autism. My sister's a specialist in autism, and she also recognises a lot of the traits in me, and I would like to be referred. And so I had to, like, right off the back really advocate for myself and make sure that I had the information about like where I might get referred to and what the process was, what the diagnostic criteria are. I had to have all of that just to have that very first conversation with the GP, and I got referred. And again, I had to like type up all my notes. I had to send them over as part of the referral process, and I got referred. And then I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And then I had a situation where I was really struggling again. And so I was like, I don't think I can wait on this anymore. Like, I need to know what's going on. And so I called. Well, first of all, I spoke to the GP and was like, did you actually refer me? Did I dream it? Did it actually happen? And they said, yes, but we can't tell you anything about where you are in the process. You need to speak to the people that we referred you to. So I called them, and they said, oh, yeah, well, we don't know if you're in the system. It takes about 2 years to get to that point. So at that point, I started to think, so this was about 6 months after the initial referral. I just thought, I don't think I can wait another 2 years to really get to the crux of what's going on and really be able to help myself and articulate what it is that's going on. And so I, at that point, started looking at different private options. I will talk in more detail, I think, in another video about why I wanted a diagnosis and like the pros and cons of a diagnosis, which honestly I haven't fully figured out yet because I've only been diagnosed for a month or so. But yeah, it was very clear to me that I wanted to go down this route, to understand what was going on, to get a diagnosis or to not get a diagnosis, but either way, to get an understanding, to maybe rule something out or figure out what was going on. Because like life was just really not sustainable at that point. Like it was just too hard, and I needed to know how I could help myself through that process. So So I went down, looking at different private options, and of course, like, all of them pride themselves on being fast, because they know that's exactly what we're not getting with the NHS. But it's also a lot of money, and so part of my problems, part of my challenges that I'm looking to overcome is that I can't work consistently. I work for myself, I freelance, I have my own business, and sometimes I don't bring in that much income because weeks or months at a time will go by and I won't earn anything. So thinking about spending money was important, but that was also the reason that I felt like I really needed to do this, was that I need to figure this out because it's stopping me from being able to make an income. It's stopping me from being able to, like, just get by into financially. So yeah, I did my research, and luckily I'm in a position where I have a little bit of cash reserves that I could pull from, and I ended up going with psychiatry, and I went with them for very, very clear reasons, which was, and I spoke to a couple of other organisations. The first thing I did was look at the reviews online. Now, we know reviews online aren't everything, but I definitely looked at reviews online. I looked at the prices for everything. But then I looked at more information on the websites about kind of the purpose behind the organisations. And to me, it seems like many of these autism diagnostic centres, or whatever they are, online diagnostics, have been set up purely because they know there's many people who have been undiagnosed, especially women, but certainly many people who've been undiagnosed, who are now realizing that this might be something that's going on, that it's really hard to get an appointment on the NHS, and you have to wait for years to get a diagnosis appointment on the NHS. And actually, I've heard from other people that if you're too high functioning, that you might not even get an appointment on the NHS. So this is why a lot of these organisations have been set up, and I didn't really like the vibe of a lot of them. It felt like they were just like capitalising on a market opportunity, when you're actually talking about really vulnerable people who probably, who may or may not have financial means, specifically because of the diagnosis they are seeking. So the reason I chose the organisation that I chose was because they're a non-profit. They're relatively recently set up, a couple of years ago, and the mission was really a lot clearer around like wanting to help people. The price point was also a lot lower than many of the other diagnosis centres, and I have felt all the way through the process that I made the right decision in terms of that organisation, which is why I'm naming it here as well. I do not have any kind of sponsorship by psychiatry. So yeah, I made my choice and I called them up, and this all took a few months from the point when I was kind of half deciding, half not deciding, and like, do I go private, do I not? And I can remember it got to Christmas time and I said to one of my friends, if I make enough money in the next, like if some other project comes in the next week that can cover the cost of this, then I'll do it. And then this other project landed like immediately, and I was like, okay, that's a sign. It took me a little while after that to go through the process, but I eventually did. So I then called them. They rang me back and we spoke about what the diagnosis involved, and if it was still something I wanted, and if I felt it would be helpful, and all the technical stuff, like I needed to be able to get online, and that I needed to bring somebody with me for my first appointment. And so the way it works is you have 2 appointments, and again, it's different in different places, but this is the process I went through. 2 appointments. The first one with psychology, the second one with psychiatry, so one with a psychologist, one with a psychiatrist. And the first appointment, sorry, I've got an itchy nose, makeup on my face, and it's No, it's hair on my face. Okay. And so, yeah, 2 appointments, and they look at a number of things. They use ASQ and DISCO, and then, but the results are based on the DSM-5 criteria. So before my appointment, I was sent a number of questionnaires that I had to fill out. So there was an ASQ, so autism spectrum quotient, and then there was anxiety and depression, and then you also had to fill out some information about your history and obviously like why you want a diagnosis. So it's all that kind of background works that the psychologist and the psychiatrist can then work from. So as it turns out, I had an ASQ score of 38, which is indicates possible autism. I think 50 is the highest score, so 38 is, yeah, it's not like the very highest, and it's but it's definitely within that band. And then they, like I said, also looked at depression and anxiety, and I had a depression score that was borderline clinical depression as well. So sometimes when they're looking at these diagnoses, they're looking at like, is this some, like, what else is going on? They look at what's called comorbidities, and so depression is one of those. It's something you can have alongside autism. It's very common to have periods of depression if you've got autism, and anxiety as well. So, and at the time I was actually really struggling. It was probably some of the worst depression I've had in quite a long time, so I wasn't actually surprised that that was on like a borderline clinical depression score. So that's just background information they use, and then you go to your appointments. So my first appointment, I needed to bring my mum with me, and that's because this is a developmental disorder, so they need to understand what's going on from your early years. You may not be able to bring a parent with you, and if that's the case, then you need to, it's ideal to have people who knew you when you were growing up. And so I chose my mum because, I don't know, I just felt like she probably would be the best person to understand and remember the things that I'd gone through when I was growing up. And we didn't actually really talk about it. I literally just texted her and said, I'm doing this thing, would you do it with me? And she kindly said yes. Obviously she's happy to do anything that helps. And so yeah, but that was, I found that very scary because it's something we'd never talked about before. And that whole first session was like, I found that quite anxiety inducing. So yeah, so that first session we talked through things. My mum was asked questions, I was asked questions. I came out of it thinking, oh, I don't think I'm going to get a diagnosis for autism, because I don't think in some of the parts around kind of restricted repetitive behaviour, I just don't have, yeah, I don't know, I've been mirroring for so long that I was like, maybe I don't do some of those things anymore. Turns out I do some of those things, but they didn't come out that much in that first one. We spoke a lot about social occasions, and yeah, it was quite hard because I guess we were bringing up things that I've never talked about with my mum before, which I think was that made it quite emotional, which of course then I almost cried in the session, which that also made me think like, oh no, they're not going to think I'm autistic because I was like appropriately emotional, because we were talking about like some quite traumatic stuff. And following that appointment, then it was quite nice because it opened the door for a conversation with my mum. So we then had a conversation. And then after that, I waited a couple of weeks before the second appointment. And in the second appointment, it was a lot of, it was similar explorations, kind of talking about different aspects of the DSM. So, and those aspects just, I'm not going to go into loads of detail about that today, but it's social communication and interaction. So, and that's a large focus of it for me. It's how it's the impact of interacting with people that really got me on this track of going down this route of looking at autism. And so yeah, social interaction and communication. And then the second bit is, like I said, about restricted repetitive patterns of behaviour. So that would be well, behaviour, interests and activities. So that's things to do with stimming, so yeah, different things you might do, repetitive movements, repetitive sounds, special interests, so being very, very focused on particular interests and activities. And you know, all of those, the interests and activities are very, very common to me. This is also where things were coming out from my childhood, and where watching other videos have been very helpful, because there were certain things that I wouldn't have ever clocked or thought, oh, that's an autistic behaviour. But certain things like chewing my sleeves and my little cords on my jumpers and that kind of stuff, that happened to me. Well, that's what I did whole time growing up. Like, all my jumpers had holes in them, every single pen I have, like the things are the lids are broken because I've chewed the end of them. And so there were things like that that were coming up. And also from a special interest perspective, I definitely have special interests, and I definitely really crave getting in deeply to particular things that I'm working on. And if I don't get to do those things, it makes me very, very anxious. But they might be more socially acceptable things, so stuff like gymnastics and things like workplace things, like certain projects that I'm working on. So so we explored all these things, and it was a Sunday afternoon, like I said, about a month ago, and what happened? Yeah, so and I sat down, I was right here at my computer on this video call, and it was very strange. I was here on my own, and I had this conversation, and then it was like, yep, I think everything's consistent with an autism diagnosis. Let's talk about next steps. And so it's like, it went from me thinking, oh, I don't think, like in the first session, maybe this is the wrong path, like maybe I've been looking at the wrong thing, to, oh, okay, this is it. And I was expecting to feel relief, but it didn't even really sink in. And I was expecting to feel relief because it was like, oh, okay, I can understand myself better now. I can explain this. So yeah, so that's how it went. And I did make a little video, which when I first got diagnosed, so you can see now like what I was thinking and feeling. Hi, today is World Autism Awareness Day, which is something I didn't know until about 5 minutes ago, when I came out of the end of my autism test and received an autism diagnosis. And I'm relieved, because I have struggled with so many things for so long, and they didn't really make much sense until I heard from high or functioning autistic people. And I kind of thought life was about making sure that everyone every single day was just like showing up and putting on a mask and being what other people needed to be. And like over time I realized that wasn't the case, and realized I had no idea what my own identity was, that all I knew what I was from a mirror or from what you might see. And I didn't understand that I was doing that, and so now I've got to learn how to not wear the mask all the time. I've got to learn who I am without a mask. But I think I know who I am. I think I already know who I am. But now I just have a vocabulary and an articulation to understand, to help explain what's going on for me. So yeah. After the diagnosis, it took a couple of weeks to get the report, and it really just described what happened in those sessions. So and where my behaviours were consistent with autistic behaviour, both from their observations and from the answers to the questions. Some of them, I will just read them now, that came from the report. Consistent patterns of overstimulation in social settings. That's extremely consistent for me. Thrives on building systems and processes. Yep. Difficulties constructing responses to others. Absolutely. That's something that really holds me back. High levels of anxiety and repeated anxiety throughout my life. There are like some records. I haven't been to the GP every single time I had anxiety, because let's face it, like, is it always that helpful? But there were times throughout my life. The other thing, actually, which I haven't mentioned yet, was that I had an eating disorder for 15 years and was seen as an outpatient for eating disorder, and went to lots of different types of therapy in order to get over that. And as it turns out, eating disorders and autism are very closely related in many cases, and of course I'll talk more about that on this channel. And then a lot of internal dialogue around performance in conversations. So that's that whole, like, when you're in social situations, trying to figure out what's going on, how to behave, what am I meant to be doing, should I change my arms now, should I have I been looking at somebody for too long or not long enough, why are they looking over there, what's going on, am I reading this person right? So all of those internal dialogues. So that's just a few things that were written in my report. So yeah, that's what happened. That's how I got diagnosed, and I then decided to tell everyone about it. And I told a couple of people, but honestly, like, most people have found out because I posted it on Facebook. Because let's face it, I don't know how to have conversations. Social situations are difficult for me. So I say I posted on Instagram, but most people responded on Facebook, and that's been an interesting part of the journey. So post-diagnosis, it's been about a month. It was strange for me. I found the stigma of it to be much more present in my mind than I was expecting it to be, and I found the relief to not be quite as prevalent as I thought it would be on the surface. But having said that, ever since getting diagnosed, I feel a lot more like myself. I feel a lot more like I'm standing up for my own boundaries. I feel like I do feel lighter. So I'm definitely glad I got the diagnosis. I'm gonna leave that there for today. Would love to hear from you. Like, where are you in the process? Have you been diagnosed as well? Does this mirror your diagnosis? And or are you thinking about getting a diagnosis? And what are the questions that you have around getting that diagnosis? Thank you for listening. Stay tuned to this channel. We're going to have loads more autism stuff on here, and like I said, we're going to really be looking at what that means for our working lives and being able to thrive in the workplace, because that's something that's very important to me, and I think that's very important for a lot of people, and we might feel like we are held back because of autism. So thank you for watching, and I will see you here soon. Bye.